The process for creating detailed materials in Cinema 4D can get rather deep, so when you're first starting, I recommend that you use some of the presets. That way you can look at the presets and try and reverse engineer how they were built. Let's open C4D by selecting the detailed.c4d file in our project panel, and then you can press Command E or Control E to edit the original. Once you're in C4D, let's look at some of the material presets that we could apply to our logo. I'm going to go up under the window menu and choose Content Browser. Now there are all kinds of presets in here, and it'll always remember exactly the last folder that you were in every time you open it. So I'm just going to back out and start from the preset section. In the light folder, we have many different kinds of presets. So let's look at materials. Materials, of course, are divided up into more subsections. So if you click through some of the different folders, you'll see different materials. Now, if you want to see the materials in more detail, click and drag on the slider to make the materials a little larger in your view. Now I want to go ahead to the ice and snow section. As we scroll through here, notice we have a couple of different detailed textures. I want to choose the snow and ice texture, so any of these presets you can easily add to your projects by double clicking. So let's double click on snow and ice. Now I can just close the content browser. To apply a preset, just drag it up and drop it to whatever model you'd like to apply it to. Now most materials typically look better when there are lights in the scene, so I'm just going to add one light by clicking the Add Light button here. I'll move the light up and then back slightly. Now, if we render the scene here, you can see I've got a kind of cool texture. Let's zoom in by holding down Alt on Windows or Option on the Mac, and then right-clicking and dragging to get a closer view of our material. If I go to render this, see how I'm getting all these bumps in the material. That was created by using some different effects generated from inside the material. I'm going to go down to my Material Manager and double-click. This will open the material editor. Whenever I'm reverse engineering the material, I first look at the different channels used to create that material. So we can see we have a color channel and a bump channel and environment and specular. Now there's something constant between all of these, and it's this kind of textured thumbnail. Anytime you're in any specific channel inside of the material editor, you'll see this texture area with a button. Now I want to go to the color section and see the texture area that we have defined here. If you click on the flyout, we can choose different things to load. Now I'm going to click off that pull out because I already know that something's loaded. It's the layer option. So if we go ahead and click on layer, notice I've got a bunch of layers that we use to create detail in this texture. Now I'm not expecting you to know how to add all of these different elements. I just want to explore some of the different settings, and then we'll build our own texture with another material. So if you go to the noise section here, click once on the little thumbnail next to the hard light pull down. That'll open up your shader. Now this shader was used to create the noise. If you go to the noise section here, I can click on the pull down, and all these different options are different kinds of noise. They create different patterns. In order to go back in the material editor, we'll go up the upper right hand corner and click this back arrow. That'll take me back to my layers. The easiest way to think of layers is think of them like a Photoshop document. We've got multiple layers that created this texture, and we have different blend modes, just like the ones you're familiar with in Photoshop, and the transparency options, again, just like the ones you're familiar with in Photoshop. The difference is each of these different things, like the noise section, these are all generated locally inside the materials editor. So enough talking, let's go ahead and create our own material. I'm going to close this material editor and go to Create menu and choose New Material. Now let's double click our material to load our material editor. Now in the color section here, I'm going to click on my texture flyout and go right down to layer. By default there's nothing in the layer, so let's click on the layer to open up our layer editor. Now in here we have different buttons we can use to load different things. The first button that will allow you to load external files like JPEGs or Photoshop documents or what have you. The next button here is the one that we're going to use, the shader button. Go ahead and click on that. We have a number of different effects we can choose. I want to go to the noise effect. So when we choose noise, it automatically is going to get loaded as my top layer, and the default noise has been applied. Let's click on the thumbnail once to load the different options. Now, just like in the preset material, we'll click on the pull down for the noise. Let's choose a different setting. I'm going to choose this gaseous setting. See how it creates a different texture? Now obviously there are a number of different options to change in this texture. I'm not going in to each individual one. Let's just look at a couple. Let's start with a global scale. If I click and drag up here, I can create the scale at a much higher level. This generally kind of smooths out my texture. Now some of these other options like speed will allow you to animate this texture. So when it's applied, it'll look like it's flowing over top of the object it's been applied to. Let's jump back to our layer options here by clicking the back arrow. I want to add another shader over top of my noise, so let's click under shader, and this time we'll add a color. So if we click on the thumbnail to open up the colors, let's go ahead and click on it and add a red color. Now when I click OK, it doesn't look like anything's happened. Well, we need to go back to our layer options here and blend it in. So let's change our blend mode from normal to soft light, and then we can change the transparency down just to blend it a little bit less. Okay, I'm going to leave it at about 50%. The color is one way of creating detailed texture, but our other texture had a bump map. Let's take what we just created and apply it to the bump map. Inside of the material editor, you can click on any of these thumbnails. If you start to drag to the different channels, it'll move that texture to that channel. So once the bump options have opened, I'm still holding my mouse down. I can hover over top of this section in the texture area, and when I let go, it's automatically going to add that layer into the texture. Now the bump channel hasn't been activated, so we need to go ahead and select that to activate it. Now the bump channel works on black and white data, so I'm going to edit the layers just for this channel. I'm going to click on edit and turn off the color. Let's bring the opacity all the way down and click the eyeball there. So when it's black and white, I'm getting a little more detail in my bumps. To see our results, let's close our material editor. I'm going to click and drag my material and place it onto my model. Now I'll go over to my model panel and select the original preset and just delete it. So now we can go ahead and render the scene, and as you can see, we've created our own rather detailed texture. All that has been made possible by starting with a preset and just doing a little bit of detective work.